morning everybody, welcome back. We had a little bit of a sad end to last week with the power outage. Don't know what caused it, but anyway the power came back on a little bit later on. But anyway, we didn't miss much, so I basically stopped when the power cut off, and what I'll continue to do today is to start and carry on as per normal. And hopefully we won't get a cut out today. So anyway, this is where we got up to. So last week we turned the little keeper for the escutcheon plate. The escutcheon plate was going to fit in the middle of it like that. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to fit that little escutcheon plate support. Okay, so I'm going to fit that onto the front of the box, and then we'll fit the escutcheon plate to it afterwards. So the first thing to do is to drill a hole about the same size as that in the front of the box. So it has to be in the front of the box here. Now I measured that last week at 17 millimeters, so that it fitted in like so. All right. So what I need to do is drill a hole into there. Now I'm going to drill it exactly the same size as the support. That was 9 millimeters, and that's the one that I did on the lathe last week. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is drill that little hole. Okay, so now I'm going to revert back to my brad point bit. Now the brad point bit, nice shape router bit, so that you've got that little point on it there. Then that will give you a nice clean beginning to the hole. The other thing is the two edges of it are nice and sharp, and so they will start a nice clean hole. So we'll get a nice clean hole are about the same size as that, or the same size as that, because this is a 9mm hole. Okay, so the 9 millimeters is the same size as the bits and pieces there. So the first thing I'm going to do is drill that. Now, just turn this around where you can see it. Out of the way. Now, what I'm doing is I'm drilling right there. Now, I measured the lock. So all I did was I measured the lock from the top edge of the lock to the center of the keyway. And when you look at that from the top there, it's just on 18 millimeters to the center of the keyway. Now that's for the Crawford lock, which is the one I'm using. And so I need to have the hole around the whole of that, that keyway there. So I've measured that 18 millimeters onto here, and that's going to be my center for my 9mm. And now, if you're like me and you like to see nice clean timbers on the inside of the box, like these here, particularly when you're putting your fittings and so forth in there, you don't want to drill all the way through. So you've got to be really, really careful about how you drill this. Now, if you're covering if you're going to cover the sides of the insides of the box with felt or something, drilling all the way through is not going to bother you too much. Now, if you're only going to put if you're not doing this technique that I'm using here by putting this on here, and you're just going to make the keyhole, you need to use a smaller drill bit, okay, and drill it in the right place. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to drill straight down through the center there. Now I don't want to drill all the way through the box. All I want to do is drill through the hole. So start carefully. And just carefully drill through. What's happened to my drill bit? It's okay, it's just I need to put a bit of pressure on it. Going too careful. up through now. And as you can see, I've got a nice clean surface over the top of the hole there. It's a little bit rugged on the inside, but I'll clean that out before we put the lock back in. And what happens now is we will glue that into place right there. Okay. Now, when I glue that back in there, this is going to take two processes. The first thing you need to do is you need to line up your grain, because if you look at that very carefully, you will see that it's got a lovely little grain pattern on it. And so I want to keep that grain pattern running along the grain of the box, right? So that will get glued in there. Now before I glue that on, I just want to remove all my pencil marks. So a little piece of sandpaper just to remove the pencil marks. It also takes any burrs off the hole that you might have. If I remove those pencil marks now I'm only using a piece of 400, so it's not as if it's going to scratch the box up that much. I'd already dressed the box beforehand. And there we have it, so that's going to get glued straight onto there. Just need to clean that hole out a little bit, so before I glue it on, I might just clean out that excess in there with my chisel. So you can see down in the hole there, there's a little bit of breakout, so it's not going to hurt anything. So just clean that up. Just tip that out. I'm just going to test my lock before I glue that on. There's my lock there, and when I look through the hole, you can actually see in the hole, you can see the keyway. All right. So I'll just pull that out again. And I'm going to glue that in place. Just make sure my grain's right. So that'll get glued just into there. So now a little bit of glue. Don't need much. And to hold it in place, I'm just going to use this little dog clip. So, a little brush, a piece of paper, now remember, on the back of here, when we fitted that onto the lathe, we actually put on a little bit of hot melt glue. Now some of that will more than likely get into the grain in there, and the glue that I'm putting on now is going to not stick to it. So what you need to do is you need to give that a light sand. So I've sanded that, and that white stuff you can see is just a little bit of sawdust in there, so it's not going to hurt anything. So just a small amount of glue. You don't need to overdo it. You don't really want a lot of squeeze out. Mind you, you can clean the squeeze out quite easily. You can clean it off quite easily. Now my grain had to go like so. Around a little bit more, straight over the top of the hole. And by doing it this way, you're actually able to line up everything. So my dog clip goes on there. Just make sure you don't move anything when you put it together. I'm just going to check that before I... Yeah, it's good. Okay. So now I'm going to put that aside, and while that's drying, it'll dry sufficiently for me to be able to move the box around and fit the bits to it. So I'll shift that out of the way, and then I'll bring the bottom top over. While that's drying, I'll fit the components to the top panel, and then okay, so components to the top panel. The componentry for the top panel, first of all, is this piece here, which is the catch for the lock. Now you've got to make sure you've got that round the right way. If you have it round the wrong way, you've got your the way the keeper comes up and catches onto it, it's not going to work. So you need to make sure that you get that right. So the lock is going to work this way, okay, so face it towards you, and your lock's going to fit on that way, and the keeper fits upside down like that, okay. So it fits like so. So when the lock closes, you can see the catch pop up. You need to have it in that position, right? So that's how it's going to catch, and that catches onto the top piece. Just like that. All right. So if that's going to go into our lock that way, what we need to do, it's going to go that way. So our keeper goes in like so. Okay, so that's going to fit in there. There's no need to take any material out from behind that. It'll fit anyway. Now, if you're not quite sure of it, before you actually screw it into place, always a good idea to get the box, and I can't touch the box at the moment because it's still drying. I know it's right anyway. Now, drill a hole. So again, what we're doing is we're using our little plunge kit. With the sawdust jammed in there, so we need to get rid of that to start with, otherwise things aren't going to work very well. I think the last time I glued this, it had a bit of glue in it, so I just need to clean that out. There you go. Sit that into there. Keep your lock as vertical as possible, or your I should say your drill as vertical as possible, so that you line it up. Now, I could just screw the brass screw straight into that, but that will probably cause me some grief. So what I've got is a steel screw, which I'm going to use to actually cut a thread. Now, the reason I use a steel screw is not likely to break. It's going to get turfed afterwards. If I use the brass screw, there's a possibility that I'll snap the top off the brass screw. Okay, so the steel screw has cut a thread, and the brass screw that I'm going to use is exactly the same size, so it should screw straight into the same hole without a drama. There's my brass screw. Now when you purchase these locks, it will come with the correct screws, so you don't need to go chasing around looking for some. And Andrew has generally puts a steel screw. Look at that, really nice. Generally puts a steel screw in the pack so that you can actually use this technique. Again, screw it down tight. Nice. My brass screw in there now. I tend to resist using an electric screwdriver to put these in. I like to actually have a feel of doing things with a hand drill, with a hand screwdriver. I can feel what's going on, and if things are not quite right, you can feel it through your fingers. So it comes up quite nice. So that's that piece. Now I need to attach the hinges. Now I've got the hinges in the other box. So what I'll do is I'll take them out of the box, fit them to the top. It's easier to fit the whole system together in one piece rather than sort of fitting the top to the bits, to the box. So I'll take these out of here. By the time I put these in, actually I might give these a little polish before I do. They look a little bit tarnished. Been sitting out for a while. And that'll give me time, give that front piece a little bit more time to dry, or at least cure enough to be able to work it. So a little bit of brasso. While I'm doing this, I just want to say, during the week I had a number of people email me about different techniques to use with the jig. So I thought what I'll do this week, this is not going to take all of the program, so what I'll do this week is I'll give you a little bit of revision on different techniques and why I use the techniques that I do with the jig, or the techniques basically that we recommend that you use when you're using the jig. And it's fairly simple, fairly easy, but for those of you who are just beginning, I've lost that little patch of brasso now. It's a fairly simple techniques and things like that, but just a bit of a heads up so that you can all, you know, those of you who are only just starting, get a bit of an idea. Those of you who are well versed in the use of the jig, just a little bit of a heads up, you may be making some error. Just excuse me a sec, I just got to have a drink. The old throat's not working this morning. Okay, so going to fit this so that the round section of the lock, when you have a look at the knuckle of the lock, you'll see on the Crawford locks, you can see it has two parts to the knuckle. It has this side here, and the other piece is in the middle. When you turn it over, you can see why it works so well. It's because it's got a space in the back here, and when you open it, it will come through and catch on the section at the back here, and stops it from opening all the way. So basically similar to a stop lock. So what I want to do is make sure that that's on the bottom of the box. Okay, so it's, when you look at the top of the box, you can only see that section. So when you put it on, it goes on like so. I've already got the holes drilled in there, so I can screw that in place. Now what I did with it, you can, if you have a look very, very carefully, you can see there's a little bit of a slope on the screw. It's not actually going straight through. It's actually pointing this way a little bit. So what happens, it's going to, when it closes down into the cavity, you're going to find that it will pull the lock this way. So it closes up the gap, if there is a gap, in the front of the lock there, and then you don't have that little horrible little gap there. So the idea is just to bring your hole a tiny little bit forward so that it will squeeze that up when it squeezes up in the countersink section of the lock. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to put all the screws in because I want to pull it apart again later down the track when I start putting the finish on. I'm not going to put the finish on during the show. I'll do that afterwards and I'll show you what it looks like once I've got it done. Okay, so here we go. This is the last one. And you can see that just giving those a little bit of a shine up makes them look quite neat. Nice and flat, nice and flat. That's nice and flat as well. So what we can see now is there's our top with all the bits and pieces added to it. So it's taken a few weeks to actually get to this stage, but now we have something that's fairly solid. It's got all the bits on it that we need, and so therefore I can now assemble that onto the box. Now the box has been sitting long enough. I should be able to take that dog clip off. Do that. Thank you, Pammy. Okay. So now you can see how that looks. Really, really nice, and it adds to the box itself. So now fitting the lock. Same technique. Push the lock in. And I'll get my screws into there. Same one here. Steel screw. I do have a screwdriver here somewhere. There it is.
So what finish will you use on this box?
The finish I'm going to use countertop Livos oil. Something that will go relatively hard, because remember it's going to be a box that will probably sit for a long time before you actually look at it again. And therefore you want something that will be a little bit hardy. A number of different, we'll do a few coats of it. We'll give it a good wax up afterwards as well. So Livos countertop oil is the one I'm going to use. Now, I believe Jim Carroll down at Carroll's Wood Turning Supplies has it on his shelf. Now there is a link at the bottom of our page. So if you go down to that, you can get a link to Jim Carroll's shop. And I'm sure he could sort you out with some if you need it. It'll get a number of coats and then it'll get waxed over the top. I may do that, the waxing over the on the show, because it's a particular technique that I use. And what I want to do is give the whole box a fair bit of depth to it. So there we go. It's looking pretty nice. Now it's just a matter of fitting the top. So what I want to do is I want to just make sure I've got the holes already screwed on here, because I took the hinges off, if you remember rightly. So it's just a matter of now screwing the top back on. maybe. Yep. So cut the screws. As you can see, it's easier to screw that on like so. How are we looking, folks? You liking that? It's coming up nice. I see, Skip, you're the one that was asking about the finish. I'm not sure where in the US you would buy Livos oil. There should be some somewhere because it is an international product. Look at that. Beautiful. Okay, so let's test out the lock. It's locked. Beautiful. Oh, nice sound too. Okay. I think what I might do is I might lock it and then I'll turn it up on its back. And fit the escutcheon plate to it. Now when I fit the escutcheon plate, what I'm going to use with the escutcheon plate, where is it? There it is. I'm going to glue that in with araldite. Because I'm gluing brass to timber, and timber glue obviously doesn't work on metal. So a little bit of brass over there, I think, just to polish that up. And araldite. So when you do your araldite, it should be even amounts. You can get this stuff from your big green store if you need be. Pretty universal stuff around the place. Make sure you mix it well. Now I don't want to use a whole lot of this because it tends to get everywhere. So just a small amount. They do come with little stirrers, but I just happen to have lost mine, so just get that so you can see it. A little bit of super glue on there. Araldite, I should say, not super glue. Don't want to overdo it. Just make sure you get down into the corners with it. As you can see, it's quite a sticky process. A little lock in there. Just need to make sure that that's straight. No, a bit more.
You had it right the first time.
How's that?
A bit more.
Bit more?
Don't touch it.
Okay, so what I want to do now is just wipe the excess glue off there. Got to hold that in the right place. really hard to get rid of that when you get it on things. Are you still straight, mate?
We've got a square there. We should use your reference line
I
a little bit.
probably should do that. Just make sure. Yep, spot on. Okay, so basically that is our box completely assembled and finished. It's taken, what, 10 weeks? It's taken quite a long time to actually get that. Needs a little bit of work on it. To get that to a stage where we can actually get it set up so that it's actually completely finished. So that's what we're looking at when you're looking at this particular box. So sanding and finishing is going to take me probably a week. All of the parts, before I actually assembled, before I cut any joints, before I cut the butterflies, before I did any of the work to it, everything got sanded to around about 600 grit, so that I don't have a lot of sanding to do. Inside was done to 1000, and as you can see on the inside of the box, it was also had a coat of finish on it. So if I give that a light sand with a finish, it's going to look quite nice, and I can just give it another recoat. But I'll give it a sand with about 2000 grit or something like that, and it's just got dust on it from sitting in the workshop here. So just a little bit of tidy up. I'll check all my joints and make sure they're all perfectly clean before I do anything. Same with the butterflies and so on. So there's our box. All right. Now, I hope those of you who have been following along with us have actually come up with a similar sort of result. I'm quite pleased with that result, and it will take pride of place somewhere here. We'll see how we go. So I'll let Pammy take that. Thank you very much. Now, all done. Gaz, I used to make lots of my own finishes as well. And again, that's quite a good recipe that you've got there. But sometimes, if you don't have time to do that, you know, the commercial ones are probably the best way to go. So, just need to get rid of some of this stuff here. I'll show you what it looks like. I'll show you what the box looks like once we've got all the finishing put on it and so forth. So I see Pammy over there inspecting very carefully. So she's making sure that it's all good. Are we all good? Yep. Terrific. All right. Now, to answer some questions. During the week, I had a number of people, just close this door here, a number of people talk to me or ask questions about why we use the jig the way we do and what is the best technique. So I thought what I'll do today, because we've finished with the box for the moment, I will give you a quick rundown. This is for all those beginners and also the people who are skilled at using the jig, different techniques on how to use the jig or what we can do with the jig. So going to be a bit noisy. So I'm going to use the A10. Now the technique that I'm using with the A10 here is the same technique that I would be using with my B10 or my H10 or H20. Exactly the same techniques involved. So there is no difference whatsoever. For those of you who are new, the pointy side or the pointy fingers on the template are for the pins. The square sections are for the dovetails. Now, your first task, probably not when you first get your jig, but your first task is to, if you've been using it for a little while, is to give it a bit of a scrub and clean out any sawdust that might build up inside the fingers. Now, if you don't do that, what happens is that the bearing will run on the sawdust and it will make it very difficult for you to fit accurately your components. So cleaning that out is quite an easy task. It's a matter of using a toothbrush and giving it a bit of a scrub up. Okay, so you can see in this one here, there's a little bit of sawdust in here. It's just a matter of giving that a bit of a scrub and cleaning it all out like so. So just making sure it's nice and clean. It's also a good idea, you can check to see that you haven't taken the parts off it where a bearing might have seized, or you might have adjusted it incorrectly or something or other, and you've taken a little part out. So it's a good idea to check that sort of thing. Now, these will last you quite some time. There's no time limit on it, like it's not a 1 or 2 use object. It's something that will take a little bit of time to wear out. So if you're only using it intermittently, well then it's going to last you forever, and you'll hand it on to your next generation, hopefully. So the router bits that I'm using for this one, for the A10, that's the router bits, the A10. Now, the bearing on them is not a sealed bearing, so you need to give it a scrub every now and then. Just make sure you clean off any sawdust or anything that might sit on top of it, and then drop a little bit of oil onto it. Now, this is something that a lot of people have forgotten to do, or forget to do, or they're in such a rush they forget. It just doesn't get done. But it's extremely important. It's only a 5-minute maintenance session, and by just doing that, one small drop is all you need. What you're trying to do is create a slurry inside the bearing. You don't want something in there that'll seize it up. Like CRC is very good at that, because it, or WD-40 I should say, is really good at doing that, because it's designed to expel water or expel moisture. So you don't want that expelled. You want a little bit slurry in there. So good idea to sort of give a little bit of oil, give it a little bit of love, it'll work for you every time. Same applies to your collet reducer. A little bit of oil on that as well. People say, oh, you put oil on that because it's going to slip. Well, actually, the oil actually helps it to grip a little bit. I'll just use one of those to spread it around a little bit. And pop that in. And spanner. Okay, so when we cut this, always dovetails first. Get rid of that. Don't need that anymore. Always use our dovetails first. Okay. So here's the rub. If we're cutting our dovetails first, right, so we're using the square side of the pins. So this is the side that we're going to be using to begin with, square. So when we line up, you'll notice that I have my red stop on the right hand side of the jig. Now that's the way I generally have it all of the time. I rarely change them over. If I change them over, it means I have to sort of create a new habit, and I don't want to do that. So if I've got my red stop, and it's just the clamp holder and the knob that are red, but the rest of it, as you can see, is blue. And I have the black one on my left hand. So I use that as a guide every time I do a setup. Now, what I have here is I have lots of bits of timber. You can see the different widths, the different thicknesses. So we're going to go through a number of different things. You can see I've written on them with texture. They are testing joints, so I'm not really concerned about what it looks like. Normally I would use chalk to write on a piece of timber if I'm going to use it, make a box. So for this exercise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a texture so that you can see what is actually happening. And that way there's no confusion. So that's nice and tight. Slip that down there. The other thing you're going to need is you're going to need to either balance your timber on here for adjusting the height of the router bit, or you can talk to us about purchasing a height adjusting pad. Okay, now where's my texter? What we need to do is we need to establish the bottom edge of the box. Right? So if the bottom edge of the box is the bit that sits on the bottom, right, like so, I want to mark that. So if I put this mark on here, like that, if I put that mark on there, what that's telling me is this is going to be the bottom of the box. This is the top of the box, the round bit at the top, okay? This also is going to be the outside of the box, because I can sand that mark off. If it's in chalk or something like that, I can get rid of the mark, all right? So it's giving me 3 bits of information: top of the box, bottom of the box, and the outside of the box. So every piece of timber that I put on the jig has that reference mark on there. And if you don't have the reference mark, you can get confused and you lose your way. Okay, so what we're going to do is just, I'll use that piece to start with. And my setup. Now this is for just basic setup of cutting yourself some joints, right? So if you're just making a square box where you're going to put the top on the bottom, top on it, and put a bottom on it, this is the technique. You're not doing any advanced cutting by expanding joints and so forth. Now that'll come a bit later in one of the other demonstrations. But when I set this up, what I need is I need a location point so that when we put the 2 pieces together, like this, just come in on that, Pammy. I want the bottom edge of it to be lined up, right? So I need to find a location point for that bottom edge, okay, so that everything lines up. Doesn't matter about the top at this stage. Everything should line up. Now, if you have your timber exactly the same width, exactly the same thickness, then you will have the top lined up as well once you get this point and you find that location point on your jig. Now, when you start cutting, you can line up simply by eye, just by doing that. And what I've got there, that's my pencil, is I've got a small gap here. I've got a small gap here, and I've got a small gap there, right? Now, because I did it by eye, there's no guarantee that that space in there is exactly the same as that space there. So I'll just show you again. So that space there may not be the same as this space here. So what my location of this back edge here is my red stop. Okay, so that gives me that base mark, or that base, to actually give me an accurate and flat join here at the box. Okay, so when I use my second piece of timber, I put it on there, I do exactly the same thing. Now you may notice that there's my face side mark. The bottom of the box is actually pointing at my red stop. So my first port of call is to make sure that my face side mark is pointing at my red stop. Now, you don't have to use the red stop. You can use the black one if you like. But I like to use the red one. I've created a habit now, and that habit actually continues on every time I make a box. And that way, I'm not making any errors because I do the same thing every time. It's the same as if you're playing golf. if you hit the ball exactly the same way every single time, not many of us can, but you're going to get the same result every single time. So you have to do things exactly the same. So I've got that lined up. Now, if I turned that over and did my first cut there, because of the way I've got my box lined up, and if I haven't got an even layout on my joints, then I'm going to have a little step at the top or the bottom of the box. Okay? So, even layout. If you want an even layout where all the joints, a little box here, where all of your joints are nicely spaced, nice and even all the way through the box, right? You need to, because of the size of the jig and the way it's cut and the way it's made, you need to make sure that your measurements here are of a particular size, right? Now, in the manual, now I've got two versions of the manual. This is the old version that Roger Gifkin brought out when he originally invented the jig. And on page 8, you'll have this grid, okay? And it tells you what the best spacing or the best size of your timber is to get a symmetrical layout, okay? So if you look at the H10, H20, the A20 and the B20 are not made anymore, but the H20 is. You can see that the variation between each of the measurements, in this case, is 18 millimetres. In the H20, because of the spacing of the dovetails, you'll see that there is 26 millimetre spacing between each of the pieces of timber, and so on up through the rankings, right? Now, because we're not making the B20 and the A20 anymore, what we've done is when we rewrote the magazine, on page 7 you'll find this small scale here. So, and it's exactly the same. So it gives you a bit of an idea. So if you've got the new manual, this is the one you will be working with. If you've got the old manual, this is the one you'll be working with the old manual. Okay? So that spacing is there for you if you can't remember the spacing for an even layout of joints. Okay, so it's there for a reference. Okay, so that's in the book. Now, let's get to cutting a joint or two. So when I lay this out, incidentally, we're looking at 81 millimetres here, so I'm going to get, and there are two ways of laying this out. You'll see that I've got half a joint here, a whole joint there, whole joint there, whole joint there, and a half a joint there. I can, if I want, line it up like so. Sometimes that's a little more accurate. That will give me a whole set. Every joint is a whole joint. There are no half joints involved. Okay, so let's lay that like so. I'm going to do half joint. Now my piece of material, as you can see, is 81 millimetres. I can use just one clamp if I want to hold that in place. If you have a jig that only has one stop on it, what you can do is you can put your clamp in the place and then hold it in place, but you must make sure that you're hard up against the stop and you're flat down on top of the template. Now the thing is, with each of the pieces of timber, what you need to make sure is you've got a very square piece of timber. Okay, unless you're doing a really advanced piece when you have a little tapers and so forth, but we're not going there. Square perfectly square will give you the best accuracy, because when if I sit my square on there, when I bring my stop up, you can see that I am very square to my stop. Okay, so if it's not square, you're going to know about it, right? So just make sure that everything is accurate like so. I'm just going to slide my stop up. Now, the backing board is designed as sacrificial. You can see on this one here, I've already started using it. I'm going to revisit this piece of timber later, and I will get all this sort of thing sorted out. And I can see I'm not going to get all the work I wanted done today because we're running out of time, but I can get some work done. Now, like I said, as I was saying before, if you only have one stop on there, you can put a second clamp on there like so. Just making sure that it's above the cutting area of where you're going to be cutting. So it will sit there quite nicely. If you've got two stops, well then of course you're going to be able to put that on like so. Okay, so I can fit that on there and lock it in place. So now that we've got it all locked in place, what we can do is here cut our joints. Now, if I just pushed my piece of timber, will you come right in on that, Pammy? If I just pushed my piece of timber straight in, you can see there's a movement in there, okay? That means that the bearing is smaller than the space I'm working in. So you need to make sure that you're rubbing right up against each of the spaces. Now, because of the way the router spins, what we need to do is you need to make sure that you are running from the right-hand side and out the left-hand side, and you must go all the way to the back. So you must go, I can get that where we can see it. You must go all the way through, around the back and out the other side. Got that? Okay, so go all the way in, all the way through and out the other side. And then I will go and do another cut along that line, and I will do another cut along that line there. Okay, so that just cleans up any excess that might be there. If you miss that section, if you miss out and you don't get that perfect on your first cuts, you're going to find when you try and put your pins in, you're going to end up with things that just don't fit. You start second guessing, you're thinking the machine's done the wrong thing, or the jig is not correct. Generally it's because you haven't actually got taken all the material out, and you must do that every single time. So, morning fix it. I see you got here in time. I'm adjusting the height. Where's my adjust? There we go. Now, this is the other important thing. When you're adjusting the height, always use your opposing piece of material. So I'm going to fit that into there, right? So that's my opposing piece of material. So I always use that. And when I adjust the height, I generally adjust it so that we've got 0.5 millimetre above the joint, so that the joints will actually stick through each other. Make sure they do stick through, because then you can just face off the joints and it still looks really, really nice. And if you've got a little chip on the edge of the piece, you can take it off with a bit of sandpaper or a light plane with a plane, or you can use any sort of machine. You can use a disc sander, you can use a belt sander, you can use a linisher. There are countless machines that will take that excess off. You just have to work them properly so that you don't destroy your joint. Okay, let's cut. So we need earmuffs. Thank you. Okay, so I'll just go to that thing. It will come in close so that you can see which way I'll do this joint, this cut. Turn some power on. Okay, so we'll cut through. So ears on, everybody. So you'll notice what I did there was my hands were down on the bench, and I moved it only a small distance, and I moved it right through to the back, and then a couple of little cuts either way. So be very careful about how you go about it. Now, so there's my joints, and you can see that they're nice and neat, they're nice and even. And when we look at the back of the joint, we can also see they're nice and clean as well. Basically because the backing board has taken the brunt of all the hardware as it comes through. So that's your sacrificial bit. You're eventually going to get rid of it. Now, there are going to be more questions about that. More answers about questions that I was asked about that. So I'm going to fix that. I'll talk about that after in a second. But now we want to make sure that our other piece of timber is going to fit flush on the bottom here so that they line up. So what we're going to do is cut the pins in that piece. So when we turn our jig around, because we're going to cut on the other side, I can line up, and I just make sure that my piece of timber is again faced exactly the same way as I had it last time. So I had my face side mark pointing at my red stop. If I do the same there, this face of my red stop is actually my location point. Okay, so that's my reference for getting a flat base. If I turned it over here and did that and then tried to fit it together, I might find that the gap distance here is not the same, because I did it by eye. I didn't do it with a ruler or any measuring equipment. So if I just sit that in there, even if I took that away, I am still going to get the right result because this is my location point. So let's jam that back up to where it was. Put my clamps back on. Going to change my route a bit. Now this material is 10 millimeters, and when you're doing these test joints or making sure that your jig is working correctly and you're getting the result that you desire, then with your test results, with your test joints, I would suggest that you use a softer timber. This is your New Guinea rosewood. It's an offcut from a box that I made earlier in the week. So it's not exactly going to be a box. I could make it into a box just by cutting another set of joints on the other end. I could do that. So again, this is my piece that's going to fit into that one. Okay, so that's my opposing piece. Same way of setting it up. Half a millimetre. It's going to look funny if this doesn't fit together. Okay, ears on everybody. Now before I start, technique on this one. You can see that the spacing between the pins is much bigger than the other side, right? The router bit's the same size, but the spacing is different. If I just went straight in, and the same thing applies here, I need to go all the way in, around the back and out the other side. Go in on the right hand side, come out on the left hand side. If I did that, I would end up with tear out on the front edge of there. I don't want that to happen, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of material out of here, so that when I do go all the way through, I'm not going to get the tear out on the front top edge of the joint. Okay, so very careful with that. So a little cut across the face first, and always make sure go right to left. I don't normally stop when I do that, but you can see how I've just taken out a little bit of there, and I've got a nice clean surface on the top edge there where I've just taken that out. So I've only gone a millimetre or so into the timber, so it's not very much. Okay, ears on, and we'll do the rest of the cuts. So there's my set of pins cut. Now this is on a standard thing. I forgot to mention, as I was saying earlier about the types of timber, I have people who ring me and say, oh, I've got some jarrah, or I've got some oak, or I've got some yew of some description, or old fence posts made out of black butt and so forth like that. I'm going to cut them up and make joints out of. When you first start, my advice to people is start with soft timbers. Things like silky oak, camphor laurel, things that are generally inexpensive. And most hardware stores won't carry these sorts of timbers. You have to go and find them from Google furniture grade timber suppliers, and you will find there are a number of different suppliers around that will actually cut your timber thick enough for you to use if you don't have the equipment to do that. And you'll also find they will have a wider range of timbers. Okay, so when you do your test joints, you should be getting this result. You can see that pops in. You can actually hear it click in. Now, my face side mark was pointing at the bottom of the box. This face side mark, again, is at the bottom of the box. And what we were trying to achieve, and we have it with this one, is a nice flat face on the bottom of the box. All right, and I think you can see, if you look along the piece of timber there, you can see how flat that is and how nicely it's lined up, like so. So the joints are nicely done. If I turn it over and show you the top, I've got the same result because both pieces of timber are exactly the same size. Okay, so the same width and so on. Now, if I measured my joint here, just come in on this one here, Pam. If I measured the distance from there to there, and the distance from there to there, you would find probably, if I did it with a micrometer, I would find there'd be a couple of thou wide, thicker here than it is there, right? Visually, it doesn't look too bad. But because I did it by eye, I've still got a perfect result. It's nicely even laid out, and it's set up exactly the way I would do if I was doing a box. Now, because we're working with timber, you've got a little bit of leeway back and forth. You can sand a little bit off to make it exactly the same. We'll do stuff like that. Now, we've gone over time, but at least I've given you one section. What I want to do is I want to go through. We'll continue a little bit further. I want to go through cutting joints in pieces this shape adding to it thin bits and thicker bits to a fairly thick piece. So I want to go through that because the questions were based around these things here, but I did have a couple of questions about setup and how to get it flat on the bottom and how to get rid of little steps top and bottom. But if you go through that process with your jointing, you're going to find that you will get a good result every single time. For those of you who are watching that asked the questions, I hope that helps. Next week, I will continue with this, but I think what we might do next week as well is I'll show you the finished box and I will give you a bit of a rundown on the next project that we're going to do. It's going to be something a little bit different, but have a similar result to what we've been doing in the past, but it's going to be done a little bit different, okay? So please take time with it, take a bit of care with it. You will find that you'll get some really good results. Read your instructions because they are very, very important, and we should be okay with that. So have a good week, everybody, and I hope today was informative for you, and I will see you all next Sunday. Okay, so I've got next week sorted partially.